There is a moment we all share yet rarely speak of. It's not the moment of sharp, agonizing grief, nor the flash of overwhelming fear. Those emotions at least confirm your presence. They remind you that you are alive and connected to something real. The moment I'm talking about is far quieter, far more insidious. It is the moment you realize you are completely empty, yet perfectly functional. The deepest fear is not the pain that never ends. It is the profound silence within, when you know you should feel something: joy, anger, curiosity. But there is nothing but a hollow echo. It's the unsettling awareness that you are here, but your life is carrying on without you inside it. Perhaps you notice it on a Sunday afternoon. You've successfully navigated the week. You've met all your deadlines in Portland. You paid the bills, you cooked a meal, you even went to the gym. From the outside, your life is a model of competence and control. You are by every metric society provides fine. But the moment you stop moving, the moment the noise of the world recedes, the silence isn't peaceful. It is deafening. You sit there untouched by your own accomplishments. You look at the people you love and you know you love them intellectually, but the warmth, the resonance, the feeling of it, it's muted, it's distant. This isn't just boredom. This is what many of us are struggling with beneath the surface: a deep, fundamental detachment. A growing awareness that the person you were waiting to become is already gone and you don't even remember when they left. This strange state where your outward life is vibrant but your inner world is muted is what we must attempt to understand today. It is the core pain of the modern, high-functioning life. It is the slow, quiet draining of color where the volume of your own existence has been inexplicably turned down. We are not talking about simple sadness or temporary exhaustion. We are talking about something more structural, something that tells you my system is running but the engine of my feeling is permanently idling. This sense of detachment often manifests in ways we dismiss as simple character flaws or just getting older. Maybe you notice you are constantly inexplicably fatigued even after a full night's rest. Maybe you find yourself endlessly scrolling through things that used to bring you genuine excitement, a hobby, a passion, a good book, and now you feel nothing but a mild curiosity followed quickly by inertia. The things you should enjoy, you no longer do. Or perhaps you have noticed these strange, sudden swings in temperament, from a quiet composure to a flash of irrational anger or hostility. It's as if your emotional thermostat is broken, flipping wildly between functional numbness and uncontrollable reactivity. You are struggling to cope, but because the pain isn't a dramatic cry for help, it remains invisible even to you. The stigma around mental health often forces people into silence. We fear being judged as dramatic or weak. We fear that our complex, subtle pain will be met with a simplistic clinical label, and so we learn to hide it to perform normalcy, until we look around and realize we have built a beautiful, intricate cage around a self that has gone dormant. Our mission here at MindRabbit is not to diagnose nor to fix. It is simply to give language to the pain you never knew how to name, to move beyond the symptoms and examine the very mechanisms your mind has constructed to survive. Because these sudden changes, this profound lack of internal resonance, are not flaws. They are evidence of a deep, silent struggle. They are not weaknesses, they are flags raised by a system in overload. To understand this deep inner silence, we must explore its architecture. It has often been described as feeling disconnected, but the reality is more stark, more cinematic. I call it the self in the glass dome. Imagine yourself walking into a busy marketplace, perhaps the farmer's market in downtown Portland on a weekend. The air is thick with the smell of coffee and rain-soaked pavement. There is music playing, laughter ringing the chaotic energy of hundreds of people pursuing simple pleasures. This is the world. This is life. Now imagine a transparent, soundproof glass dome descends, sealing you off entirely from this scene. You can see everything perfectly. You can observe the joy on the faces of the children, the hurried anxiety of the commuter, the focused pleasure of the chef choosing produce. You can intellectually process the entire sequence of events. You know analytically what happiness looks like. But the dome is thick, the glass is cold. You cannot hear the music. You only see the drummer's motion. You cannot smell the coffee. You only see the steam rising. And when you reach out your hand, you hit the unyielding, smooth barrier. You are witnessing your own life and the life of the world, but you are utterly insulated from it. This is the state of emotional detachment or numbness. It is the psychological architecture of the muted landscape. It is not something you choose. It is something your nervous system constructs. The detachment is the barrier. The silence within the dome is anhedonia, the clinical term for the inability to feel pleasure in normally pleasurable activities. They are deeply intertwined. The mind, in its infinite wisdom and flawed design, creates this shield to manage intolerable levels of stress, anxiety, or pain. If you cannot feel the bad things, the mind reasons you should not feel the good things either. It is a non-negotiable package deal. So you continue to go through the motions. You attend the birthday party, you watch the sunset over the Oregon coast, you sit down to eat your favorite meal. Your logical mind records the event as positive or enjoyable, but the emotional response, the warmth, the sense of meaning, the internal lift never penetrates the dome. It remains a muted visual spectacle observed from a safe, sterile distance. This shield, this state of existence, fundamentally alters your relationship with time and memory. Because profound feelings are the anchors of memory, when feeling is absent, time begins to flatten. Weeks and months blur together. You find yourself wondering, what did I even do last month? The answer is, you did many things, but none of them left a vivid emotional imprint because the internal camera was recording in black and white and without sound. This self-imposed isolation, this protective barrier, may have been a necessary survival tool at one point in your life. Perhaps during a time of chronic stress, unresolved trauma, or prolonged emotional abandonment. But survival tools, when kept active too long, can become cages. The dome was built to keep the danger out, but now it is keeping you in. The next step is understanding why the body felt the need to build the dome in the first place. The subtlety of anhedonia and detachment is precisely why it's so difficult to address. We tend to moralize these feelings, believing we simply lack gratitude or determination. But the deeper truth lies in the chemical and structural mechanics of the brain. According to numerous studies in neuroscience, this muted experience is less a failure of will and more a failure of the reward pathway, a complex circuit that hinges significantly on the neurotransmitter dopamine. Think of the dopamine pathway not just as the chemical for pleasure, but as the chemical for motivational saliency. It tells the brain, this matters. Go get it. Dopamine is the engine that drives us to pursue a reward, not necessarily the reward itself. When you engage in something you traditionally found enjoyable, say watching your favorite team play in Boston or listening to a new album, the brain is supposed to release a burst of dopamine. This burst acts as an internal flag, signaling that the activity is worthwhile and should be repeated. However, prolonged psychological stress, chronic low-grade anxiety, or repeated emotional neglect can cause a fundamental shift in this system. The brain, seeking to conserve energy or protect itself from further disappointment, which the reward system is highly sensitive to, becomes less sensitive to dopamine. It's like an electrical system overload. Instead of blowing a fuse, the brain's internal regulator activates a silent circuit breaker. The system doesn't shut down entirely, you can still function, you can still perform. But the sensitivity dial for motivation and joy is turned down, perhaps permanently, until the underlying conditions change. This explains why you can look at the evidence of your life, a successful career, loving friends, a comfortable home, and still feel that profound lack of internal drive or emotional echo. The objects of pleasure are still present, but the internal machinery required to process them has gone quiet. This process is highly rooted in the body's attempt to manage chronic stress. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, may be firing consistently at a low level due to inner turmoil or unresolved trauma. To cope with this constant low-level alarm, the brain instructs the body to enter a state of dorsal vagal shutdown, a key concept in polyvagal theory. This state is characterized by decreased heart rate, increased muscle flaccidity, and most importantly for our topic, emotional blunting. Your inability to feel pleasure or motivation is in this light not a choice. It is a biological imperative, a desperate, flawed attempt by your nervous system to stabilize itself after a prolonged period of instability. It is the exhaustion of the biological self fighting a psychological war it never signed up for. Understanding this biological underpinning moves the conversation out of the moral realm and firmly into the compassionate one. The neurological shutdown. This silent circuit breaker leads us directly into the psychological consequence, the profound cost of emotional self-defense. This protective mechanism, while initially saving you from immediate psychological collapse, is not without its heavy price. Clinical models, particularly those dealing with trauma and sustained stress, refer to this as emotional blunting, a coping strategy. We often believe coping means actively fighting stress, but sometimes coping is simply enduring by going inert. It is a subtle form of dissociation where the mind separates the self that observes from the self that experiences. Imagine you experienced a period of intense, unrelenting emotional pain, perhaps a difficult breakup, chronic financial instability, or a hostile work environment. Your mind registered this environment as fundamentally unsafe. To survive this period, you implicitly learned a crucial lesson. Feeling is dangerous. The mind, in an act of profound and flawed wisdom, implemented the glass dome. If you cannot feel the excruciating sting of rejection or the crushing weight of anxiety, you survive. And this strategy worked. You made it through that period. You successfully avoided the worst of the emotional fallout. But here is the central paradox. The mind is an indiscriminate surgeon. When it chooses to numb the pain, it doesn't just cut out the capacity for grief and fear. It excises the entire emotional register. The mechanism that generates deep, sharp pain is the same mechanism that generates profound, resonant joy. You cannot silence one without muting the other. This indiscriminate protection is the core reason why you might look at your life, a life objectively filled with reasons for happiness, and still feel nothing but that neutral, flat, emotional plane. The safety of the dome is guaranteed, but the vitality of life is lost. Furthermore, this blunting creates a profound psychological confusion. Because you are not actively feeling bad, you often tell yourself, "I must not have a problem." You look for dramatic indicators of distress like weeping or panic attacks. When they are absent, you dismiss the quiet emptiness as laziness or moral failing. This leads to what is known as secondary shame. Shame not for being sad, but for being unable to be happy. The inability to fully grieve the past or to connect with the present forces the emotional labor into the unconscious. That labor doesn't disappear. It simply translates into physical and behavioral symptoms, which the original video correctly pointed out. Unexplained fatigue, significant changes in appetite, or the need for compulsive rituals. These are simply the emotional debt being paid in the currency of the body and behavior. They are proof that the quiet shutdown is actually an intense, unseen struggle. We must shift our perspective entirely on what this emotional muting signifies. We often frame the inability to feel as a personal failure, a failure of character, discipline, or resilience. But if we observe it through the lens of psychological mechanics, we arrive at a radically different conclusion. The exhaustion, the anhedonia, the detachment, these are not indicators of your weakness. They are paradoxically evidence of your fierce, unconscious loyalty to survival. Consider this. Your system, facing an overwhelming threat or prolonged emotional injury in the past, made a tactical decision. It decided that the risk of feeling the full weight of that pain was greater than the cost of losing feeling entirely. Your body initiated the shutdown not as a mistake, but as a deliberate life-saving act of self-preservation. It is in a way a gentle betrayal by your own defense system. It betrayed your capacity for joy in order to keep you fundamentally intact. The shield that saved you then is the wall that isolates you now. It is a form of cognitive dissonance where the body and mind are working at cross purposes. The conscious self wants to feel alive, but the primitive nervous system refuses to lift the protective quarantine. This insight is crucial because it removes the element of self-blame. You are not lazy, you are not ungrateful, you are not broken, you are simply over-surviving. You are still operating under emergency protocols in a world that is no longer an emergency. And this over-survival costs energy. Think about the high-functioning numbness we often see in the American workplace. The exhaustion is real. It's not just the physical labor of the job. It is the continuous energetic labor required to maintain the emotional shell of normalcy when the inner world is in grayscale. This is the exhaustion of high-functioning emotional blunting. You are constantly suppressing the internal alarm signals, and that suppression is the true source of your chronic fatigue. This is why traditional motivational advice fails so spectacularly here. You cannot simply choose to be happy when the underlying circuitry, the dopamine reward pathway, the nervous system's safety cues, are convinced that experiencing anything deeply will lead to collapse. Pushing for joy when you are numb is like trying to force a dead battery to light up a city. It only increases the fatigue and the self-criticism. The first step toward change isn't activation. It is compassionate recognition. It is acknowledging the shield and quietly thanking it for its service while simultaneously informing it that the immediate crisis has passed. When we understand this inner architecture, the protective numbness, the biological circuit breaker, the outward symptoms, which the original video correctly highlighted, take on a completely new meaning. They cease to be random indicators and become coherent parts of a single silent story your nervous system is desperately trying to tell you. Consider the symptom of repeated actions or checking things many times. This is often associated with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and while a clinical diagnosis requires professional assessment, The underlying psychological engine for many such rituals is a need for control in a world that feels overwhelmingly chaotic. If the inner world is mute, unstable, and untrustworthy, the mind desperately seeks stability externally. These compulsive rituals, checking the door lock 4 times, washing hands until they are raw, or adhering rigidly to an unnecessary routine, are not just strange habits. They are the emotional system attempting to externalize its anxiety. You cannot control the inner turmoil or the silence in your chest, so you transfer that immense, unmanageable anxiety onto a small, manageable task. If I perform this ritual perfectly, the irrational belief goes, then perhaps I can prevent the internal or external catastrophe I constantly fear. Similarly, the significant changes in appetite, whether a sudden lack of hunger or the tendency to overeat, are the body's attempt at regulation when the emotional landscape is unreliable. When the primary source of emotional regulation, feeling and processing emotions, is shut down, the body reverts to primal, immediate forms of self-soothing. Food, or the control over its absence, becomes the quickest route to influence internal chemistry or exert control. These are not failures of discipline. They are the desperate cries of a nervous system starved of emotional stability. This brings us back to the mood swings, the sudden shift from composure to irritability, anger, or hostility. This is the pressurized release valve. When emotions are consistently blunted and contained behind the glass dome, they do not dissolve. They build pressure. When the pressure exceeds the capacity of the shield, it bursts out in an uncontrollable, disproportionate reaction. The sudden irritability you feel is often not about the small triggering event, the misplaced keys, the traffic jam. It is the backlog of unprocessed, unexpressed feelings finally escaping the containment field. According to psychological models of human behavior, the goal of these symptoms is often the same: to gain an immediate, if temporary, sense of predictability or relief from the underlying sense of inner turmoil. We must stop judging these symptoms as problems to be fixed and start viewing them as messages to be decoded. They are silent alarms. They are clues left by your subconscious showing you precisely where the containment field is failing and where the most urgent need for genuine safety lies. If the emotional shutdown, the glass dome, was built out of necessity, then recovery is not about tearing it down violently. It is about gently and slowly convincing your nervous system that the threat is gone and the shield is no longer mandatory. You cannot force a deeply fearful system to feel joy. You can only invite it to feel safe. This process moves away from the aggressive pursuit of happiness and towards the quiet, persistent pursuit of safety. First, acknowledge the survival tactic. Stop fighting the numbness. Instead of judging yourself for the exhaustion or the lack of joy, try an act of radical acceptance. Whisper to yourself, "This numbness was necessary. It was a brilliant, although costly, way I survived. I honor its effort, but I am ready to explore other options." This act of non-resistance helps lower the internal guard the nervous system is holding up. Second, microdosing safety. Many contemporary psychological models, deeply informed by the polyvagal theory, suggest that large leaps towards emotional vulnerability are counterproductive. When the vagus nerve is locked into a defensive shutdown state, you must offer it microdoses of safety. These aren't grand gestures. They're simple physical anchors. Can you feel the texture of the chair beneath you right now? Can you really taste the water you drink? Can you pause and notice the light shifting on the wall? These small, tangible, and neutral sensory inputs re-establish the link between the self in the dome and the external reality without demanding an emotional response. This quiet grounding tells the ancient parts of your brain the present moment is safe. Third, redefining pleasure. Since the core Anhedonia has disconnected you from grand sources of joy, you must lower the threshold of what counts as pleasure. Do not chase the euphoria of a major life event. Chase the fleeting satisfaction of a well-executed small task, the sense of completion after cleaning a drawer, the quiet contentment of a simple warm shower. These small, reliable acts of completion and self-care release tiny, consistent trickles of dopamine, enough to gently remind the reward pathway that effort can still lead to positive outcome and safety is maintained. Over time, these small acts of gentle competence begin to rebuild the circuitry, one tiny connection at a time. Remember the lesson of the gentle betrayal. You are not trying to fix a flaw, you are trying to update a program. This is a slow, atmospheric work, not a sudden, dramatic, motivational sprint. The restoration of feeling begins with the restoration of safety, and safety is built in the quiet, observed moments of the present. We began with the realization that the deepest pain is often the absence of feeling the glass dome that separates you from your own life. We've analyzed how this state, characterized by anhedonia, detachment, and chronic fatigue, is not a moral failing, but a sophisticated, costly survival mechanism orchestrated by your nervous system to cope with past overload. The final insight is this: the goal is not to immediately re-experience the grand emotions. The goal is simply to re-establish communication with the self that is locked inside the dome. You do not need to fight the numbness. You need to listen to it. The numbness is telling you a story about your limits, about the moments when you had to be stronger, quieter, and more isolated than you should have been. It is a signpost pointing back to the needs that were left unmet. The persistent fatigue is the final bill for the exhausting work of pretending everything was okay. The mood swings are the cries of the emotions that were forcefully silenced. Your pathway out of the muted landscape is not a sudden motivational leap, but a quiet, patient negotiation with your own biology. It is the work of disarming the defense system through consistent, gentle proof of safety. Do not ask yourself, "What should I do to be happy?" Ask instead, "What small, undeniable evidence of safety can I give my nervous system right now?" It could be the controlled, rhythmic breathing that tells the amygdala to stand down. It could be the simple act of choosing a favorite cup for your coffee, a minor rebellion against the neutral grayness. It could be the bravery to acknowledge the recurrence of suicidal thoughts, the final darkest symptom we noted, and understanding that this profound sense of hopelessness is not a judgment on your worth, but the ultimate expression of a system utterly depleted and seeing no viable path to safety. If you find yourself experiencing recurring thoughts of death or self-harm, that is the most urgent, loudest sign that the isolation is too profound and the system is in critical failure. In those moments, the only job is to break the glass dome just enough to reach out for an external anchor. The hotlines, the professionals, they are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of a final, powerful instinct to survive. The restoration of feeling, the process of finding the color again, is not the destination. It is the journey of understanding that your muted experience was a temporary accommodation. The house with the locked doors, the one we talked about, the one where you sealed off the joyful rooms along with the painful ones, it is not ruined. It is waiting. The silence is simply giving you the quiet, necessary time to find the keys, one small, safe action at a time. This is the work of building resilience, not through loud affirmations, but through quiet, internal truth. Thank you for being brave enough to look into the silence.